Okay, so for today we're going to be talking about Mac, Rbac, two different versions of Rbac, and then DAC. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so our first thing is Mac, and the M stands for mandatory, and the AC will be access control. So in this model, this is probably your most secure model of access control. It's primarily used in government facilities and really high controls. And mandatory access begins with security labels assigned to all resource objects on the system. So every security label contains usually two pieces of information: classification. So if you're familiar with anything with the government, you'll see items are rated as secret, top secret, super top secret, confidential. However, the ranking system is, there are different rankings for different pieces of data. And then there's a category, which is essential to the indication of the management level, the department, or the project, who that data is available. So just because you have a top secret clearance doesn't mean that you can see all top secret information. You have to have the clearance plus you have to have the access to the project or the department or whatever. So that's mandatory access control. So it's probably the most restrictive. The users can't overwrite anything. So let's talk about the next two. So our next one that we see is RBAC. So the BAC, that part's easy. That's our based access control. The R can stand for either rule or role. So that can be a little confusing because if we look at the acronym, it's all the same. It's RBAC. And sometimes if you're speaking with people, you may get these two confused. So you may need to clarify, are you talking about rule-based or are you talking about role-based? So the difference is, in role-based, every person that's hired, or every type of person that is accessing systems, they're assigned a role. So you might have maybe HR person, maybe an engineer, an admin, maybe a VP. So they're going to have different things that they can access based on their role within the company. So a VP is not going to need the same access to systems that maybe an engineer is, and HR is going to need to look at different systems than maybe a network administrator. So this is our role-based access control on this side of the screen. Our rule-based access control, so instead of assigning the permissions to the person, let's try this real quick. So instead of assigning the rules to the person, on our rule-based, we're assigning the permissions to an object. So what that means is every type of object, every type of folder, or any type of document or anything is going to have with it, it's going to have some properties that says that this can be done to this file, this can be done by this to this file, and by the way, it can be done by this group and this group, but maybe this other group can only read, and we'll say our third group, we'll specify in here that they can have no access to this file. So everything in here in this second option is our rule-based access control. So again, kind of differentiate. The first one over here is our role, and we're primarily focusing on the person. This is our rule, and we're focusing on the object. So those are the two Rbacs. So we looked at mandatory access control, rule-based, and role-based access control. And now let's look at what's probably the most prevalent, because it's the thing that comes out there when you buy a computer, you turn it on, or maybe you even configure the computer to some sense. Maybe you even lock down some of the things using something like group policy or some sort of network management console. So you say, well, hey, you can't change the time and you can't play solitaire. You may even set up shares for them to access on the network. So you're going to have a hybrid situation there. But the D in here is discretionary, and that discretionary access control comes with some big responsibilities for the end user. And the end user isn't always the greatest person to decide how a system is handled in regards to security and sharing information. They're usually concerned with getting their job done, being productive in the best case, and not getting their job done and being destructive in the worst case. But when you use discretionary access control, you're really leaving a couple gaps wide open. So the way that this gets implemented so often is when you buy a new Windows 7 desktop, you install it, tell the user, hey, or go to work, you're in HR now. Go to work. Right, so they go into their system and they begin doing their work, and they begin making files, saving documents, and they say, oh wow, well these files, these are some pretty important files. I'm going to go into the properties and make it so that only I can see it, and maybe I'll put a password on it, or maybe I'll think Susie, who's also she's in management, but she helps out in HR pretty often, so I have permission. I created this file, so I'm going to share some with her, and so she can access these important files as well, because I think this job is important for her. So that leaves a big problem of who's really managing all of the permissions of all the files, all the folders, all of the content that your users are creating. What happens with the chain of custody of those files? Who says that the file was only seen by the person that created it? How do we know that they didn't share it with another colleague because they thought it was important, or maybe they're just gossiping, or they're doing something they shouldn't have done? And then the other big thing with discretionary access control is you're giving the user a good bit of freedom and a good bit of permissions on the system. So this can be popular with attackers who want to exploit this system to get to our end user here, our HR user that is got control over her machine. So what we can do is we can do an elevation attack. So we can start with her machine, and then we can start connecting to other machines within the network. But discretionary access control is extremely popular because it's the default. It takes less time for the administrator to handle an audit on the front end because you set it up and you deploy it and it's out there. But the bad thing is when you have an issue arise and you have to explain who had access, what they accessed, when they created these files, who had copies of the files, how much data was there, what data was deleted. All of these things can be a real chore when you've allowed discretionary access control. And I'm not advocating that discretionary access control should completely go away. I'm just saying be aware of what risk you take on when you use discretionary access control. If you use one of the other ones, then you kind of run the risk also of going the other way. So if you're using mandatory access control, you may need a great bit of assistance from your security group or your administration group to make sure that your users are able to access the resources that they need to complete their job. So, as with many things that are complex systems, it all really depends on your situation and your scenario. And the good thing is you can kind of blend some of these. So, I hope that gives you a good overview of our 4 different controls. So again, they were mandatory, rule, role, and discretionary. Alright, so thank you for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks.